are such a genuine gem. Thank you for clicking on my video. I'm Brooke Makenna, but today's video is about serial killer Donald Black Panther Nielsen, who was a monster in every sense of the word. Now, this investigation was one giant goose chase, but in the end, it was finally solved. However, to get there was not easy. By the way, for Suspect Summer, I am posting so much content in the month of July, so make sure you don't miss out and subscribe down below. Now let's get into the story. It was 1975 in Shropshire, England, and 17-year-old Lesley Whittle lived with her mother in Highley. Lesley was born in 1957 to Dorothy and her boyfriend George Whittle. Now, George Whittle was a very wealthy man who owned Whittle Coaches, which was a coach tour operation, and he was very wealthy from this. And that meant that Lesley grew up in a nice big house with her mother, and she was known as an heiress because of this. In 1975, she was going to Wolfram College, Wolverhampton, and she was known as a friendly, fun-loving, down-to-earth young woman who had an unbreakable bond with her mother. You see, her father had passed away 5 years prior and left them with 3 estates, and also left Lesley with £82,000, and he also gave his son Ronald some money as well. Now, the only problem with this is that George didn't marry Dorothy, Lesley's mother, because he already had a wife named Selena. And after he passed away and he had given so much to Lesley and Dorothy and Ronald, Selena was kind of upset with this, and she began the legal proceedings to get the estates from Dorothy. Now, this became huge news in the media a few years prior, but on January 14th, 1975, even bigger news would break about this family. You see, at around 1:30 that morning, Dorothy had come home from a night out, and she went to check on her daughter, and Lesley was nice and sound asleep in her bed, so Dorothy decided to take a sleeping pill and head to bed herself. However, the next morning she would wake up, go downstairs, have some breakfast, and Lesley wasn't coming down, so she decided to go up and check on her, and that's when she found that Lesley wasn't inside the room and her clothes for that day hadn't been touched. Then she found possibly the worst thing a parent could find, and that was a note, a ransom note demanding £50,000 and telling her not to call the police but to wait for a telephone call at the Swan Shopping Center in Kidderminster that evening between 6 p.m. and 1 a.m. She was to take the call, give only her name, and have no police with no tricks or anything, or Lesley would die. This note was punched out on a 6-foot strip of Dymo tape, or basically like a handheld label maker's tape, and immediately Lesley's mother, Dorothy, tried to call Lesley's brother Ronald, who was older than her, but the phone lines had been cut. The phone was completely dead, so without even getting dressed, Dorothy hopped in her car and headed to Ronald's house to grab him and come back to the house. They found that there was actually another ransom note in a Turkish Delight box in the lounge, but after they found that there were 2 ransom notes, no sign of Lesley, Ronald actually called the police. Lesley's dressing gown and slippers were completely gone, and that was the main factor in calling the police, even though the note had said not to. Detective Chief Superintendent Bob Booth was on the case immediately, and he was one who had solved 70 cases. He had worked on 70 cases and he had solved all of them, and so he was really ready and rearing to go in this case. And in fact, he saw the ransom note and immediately withdrew £50,000 from the Whittles' bank account and photocopied every single one so they could later be tracked. And if somebody ever spent them, they could get a lead in that area. And the only thing he couldn't do was meet this person at the shopping center and make the phone call. So Ronald, Lesley's brother, went ahead and said he would do it and headed that way. There were police hidden nearby and everything was ready to go, except for now they were fearing that the kidnapper would not even call at all, because the news had just broke in the media that all of this was happening. and nobody was supposed to know about it yet. Bob had forgotten one thing in his brilliant plan, and that was a media blackout. The phone call actually came at midnight that night. No one was there to answer it because one of the officers that Bob had left in charge there had said, oh, no one's gonna call because somebody leaked it to the media, so let's just head home. But in fact, because of that, they missed the call. The next day, nearly 250 investigators and reporters were on the case searching, trying to find clues. And Ronald was not going to give up so easily. He had gone home that night, found that there had actually been a call made, and was so furious that the next night he went back and stood in that phone booth waiting and waiting for hours. However, reporters had also caught news of that and decided to go to where this phone booth was and take pictures of him and bombard him with questions to the point where he had to leave a few hours later. Just when it began to look hopeless, 2 days after Lesley had disappeared on January 16th at about 11:45 a.m., the phone rang inside the Whittle residence. Now this was Lesley's voice on a recording saying, "Mom, you need to go to Kids Grove Post Office telephone box. The instructions are inside. I'm okay, but there are to be no police and no tricks, okay?" Now Ronald agreed to go the 75-mile distance, and he left at around 1:30 a.m. on January 17th. He left from the police station and he was wearing a police transmitter to make sure he was okay because of course police couldn't go with him. Now Ronald didn't know where he was going, and this made him an hour late to the actual location, and then he spent another 30 minutes trying to find the instructions inside the telephone box. He couldn't find them anywhere, but once he finally found the Dymo tape, it said to go to Bathpool Park, which was kind of nearby, about a mile away. The note said, "Go to the top of the lane and turn into no entry. Go to the wall and flash lights. Look for torchlight. Run to torch. Further instructions on torch." Now Ronald did as he was told. He flashed his lights. He even got out and started yelling to see if anyone would answer, and nothing happened. And after about an hour of sitting there, the operation was called off and he was sent home. However, a couple parked in the area said that they had seen a patrol car going by around the same time, which could have spooked the abductor. The police officers in this area were different from the ones actually investigating this case, and to make up for their possible mistake of having a patrol officer go by, they said that they would search the area on their own time to see if they could find anything. However, Bob said absolutely not. The abductor doesn't think the police has anything to do with this, and if they didn't see the patrol car, we're not going to give them reason to believe that they are involved. But Bob did send out investigators on his own to very discreetly search the property. However, after a few days of searching, they didn't find anything, and investigators turned to actually using the media rather than having the media use them, and they had the Whittles plead for information as well as people to stop sending in hoax calls. They were getting a ton of hoax calls that were just taking up time and energy from this investigation and actually finding where Lesley was. Unfortunately, this didn't help in bringing in any more tips, but a week later they would find the biggest thing in the investigation thus far. Because the same time as the first ransom drop that failed, there was actually a car that was just abandoned 6 feet away at a Freightliner railroad terminal. And 300 yards away from that, a security guard had been shot. His name was Gerald Smith, and he had been shot 6 times in the back. He was recovering, however, they didn't even realize that this car and this shooting could have been the reason why there was no phone call until midnight, or that it could be connected until 8 days later. And they went to search this car and they found several things inside. They found a roll of plastic tape, slippers, and a cassette. And when they found this cassette, they were very worried that they had missed a very important clue. And when they played it, they were very right, because Lesley was the one talking. She said, "Mom, go onto the M6 north to Junction 10 and onto the A454 towards Walsall. Instructions are taped under the shelf of the telephone box. There's no need to worry, Mom. I'm okay. I got a bit wet, but I'm quite dry now. I'm being treated very well. Okay. There were also 4 envelopes with ransom notes found inside that kind of led down a path, and Bob decided to go ahead and take this path to see where it would lead him. These were thought to have been meant for Ronald on the night of the drop, where he was supposed to get the call and then find the car, and this led from several different stops at telephone boxes and led to this car. And another note was found on a lamppost. It was saying to cross onto the car park to gate 8 to Dudley Zoo. This is where Gerald Smith was shot, and this is when they knew that there was a good chance that Leslie's abductor had also shot Gerald Smith. But this was not good news whatsoever, because the bullets used on Gerald Smith were found to be identical to ones used by a wanted man named the Black Panther, because this man was a serial killer and was still unknown. You see, a year prior in 1974, in that February in Harrogate, a sub-postmaster named Donald Skipper was shot to death. This was done by a man in a black hood, and it was so bad that investigators said that he was someone that you should not approach whatsoever. 5 months later in Baxton, he killed another postmaster named Derek Aston. 2 months later in Langley, he killed Sidney Grayland. And now he had kidnapped a teen girl. The Black Panther had gotten his nickname because during an interview, Derek Aston's wife had described him as so quick that it was almost like a panther. And at the end, the reporter said, "Where is the Black Panther?" Now it was a month after Leslie's kidnapping, and everyone was still asking that same question. And then on February 10th, the media blackout that had finally been placed was lifted, and everyone was talking about her abduction. However, this is when Ronald slipped up and said during an interview that he was on a ransom drop to find his sister. And of course, because the abductor had said that you cannot work with police whatsoever, when reporters were asking Bob Booth about this ransom drop, he had to completely lie and say, "I have no idea what you're talking about. What are you talking about? He went on a ransom drop without us? I cannot believe he did that." And you can just see that he was actually a really good actor during the interviews, but it was probably very terrifying at that time, realizing that this could be between life and death for Lesley. But because of this, police now had a reason to go look into Bathpool Park, because Ronald had slipped up and told them this, and so they had a reason to go full force into searching it. And they found a dymo tape that said "drop suitcase into hole," and they also found a torch near a drain. A few weeks later, a second search of this park ensued, and this time they went and lowered themselves into this drain. In there, they found a dymo tape machine and some actual tape, and when they went down a little bit further, they found a tape recorder. This was at the bottom of a network of tunnels, which is how the abductor possibly came and went. Up on the surface, however, a leather jacket and binoculars were found near another drain, and so they decided to search that one as well. It was 60 feet deep, and once they got to the bottom, they found a yellow sleeping foam mattress, a blanket, and a sleeping bag. Then hanging from a steel wire 7 inches from the bottom was Lesley Whittle. And her autopsy showed that she hadn't died from actual strangulation, but from the shock of the fall and how her heart stopped beating. Lesley had lost a good amount of weight and had nothing in her stomach. Many believe that after this abductor possibly saw the patrol car in the area, he went and he pushed Lesley off the edge. Although some believed that the abductor fled after seeing this cop car, didn't even go back for Lesley, and after so many days inside, she accidentally fell off herself. Out of all of these items found in these drain shafts, there was only one partial fingerprint found, and it was not a match to anyone in the databases yet. It would be 12 months after Leslie's abduction that the police would get lucky. It was December 1975, and 2 police officers went to go talk to a suspicious man near a Mansfield post office. And when they got there, they kind of saw the man go by, and they rolled down their window to talk to him. And at this point, he pointed a gun at them. He then got in the car and put a gun to one of the officer's sides and told him to drive. Now, with the threat of a sawn-off shotgun in one of their sides, they did as they were told, and this abductor told them or asked them if they had any rope. Now, they were driving like they were told, but they knew that they were headed to a roads that were completely out of town and wouldn't have any chance of getting any help. So this officer decided to kind of take it into their own hands and start swerving the car, going left and then back right and saying, which way, left or right, kind of trying to get him all frazzled. And at this point, the gunman, of course, was swerving all over the car, and the officer slammed his brakes right in front of a fish and chip shop. And at this point, a guy who was getting his meal inside saw that these officers were trying to wrestle a gunman and ran outside to see if he could help. He went and he held his wrists, and together all three of them actually got this gunman down and arrested. Now, this gunman, of course, was brought in for questioning, but didn't talk for 2 days until he finally gave them his name. Donald Nielsen. And they went and searched his house, and what they found was insane. In his attic, he had masks, car keys, weapons, ammunition, and a sculpture of a black panther. Now, when Donald was first questioned about Lesley's murder, he would wait a few minutes, staring at a wall, counting the bricks before answering. It was very strange. And then all of a sudden he changed his mindset and said, okay, yeah, I'll give you statements for all of the murders that I've done, and they can be separate so it's easier for you. Donald's fingerprints were found to be a match to the one found at the crime scene, and he wrote an 18-page confession on Lesley's murder, saying that he had been spooked by helicopters and search dogs that evening, and that he went back into the drain shaft to gather his own stuff, where he accidentally knocked Lesley off to her death. And in July of 1976, Donald was convicted of the kidnapping and murder of Lesley Whittle and sentenced to life. 3 weeks later, he was convicted of the other 3 murders and given another 5 life sentences. However, the judge was not done there and gave him another 61 years. 21 for kidnapping Lesley, 10 for blackmailing her mother, and 3 more 10-year sentences were given for 2 burglary charges and possessing a shotgun with the intent to endanger life. No charges were actually given for the shooting of Gerald Smith because he had died a year and a day after he had been shot. But the judge even recommended that Donald be given a whole life tariff or a life imprisonment until death. Now, Bob Booth, who had been working this case from the beginning, finally got to talk to Lesley's kidnapper and killer. And this was, I'm sure, a very, very hard time for Bob, but even more so when Donald began to blame Bob for Lesley's death. Now, he never really explained why. I'm assuming it was because of the patrol car that was there, or possibly the helicopters and dogs. He blamed Bob for bringing those in and killing Lesley, but Donald was more concerned about talking about the media attention and how much it was about him and how amazing that was for him rather than Lesley's death at all. Even though Bob, I'm sure he didn't take it very lightly hearing that Lesley's killer was blaming him, but then his own police department, the Criminal Investigation Unit, discharged him for being disloyal to his fellow police officers. And today, Bob says, "We let her down. I let her down. I'm in charge. It was my fault, and I'm tragically sorry." But that breaks my heart because the real killer here was Donald Nielsen, who was actually Donald Nappy. He was born August 1st, 1936, and began kidnapping at the age of 12, 2 years after his mother had died of breast cancer. However, the police didn't really do anything because they knew of his situation and they knew he probably needed it, so he didn't get any repercussions for that. At age 18, he married 20-year-old Irene Tate and was persuaded to leave the army that he had been serving in. 5 years later, they had a daughter named Catherine, and that is why Donald then changed his last name from Nappy to Nielsen Neilson because he had been bullied a lot for his last name in school and didn't want the same thing for his daughter. There are several different theories on how he came up with the name Neilson. One was that it was from an ice cream van that he and his family went to. One was that it was a taxi driver where he took over his company and his last name was Neilson, so he just kept it. And the other was that he just simply liked it. But nevertheless, that wasn't the only name Donald Neilson had, and it wasn't just the Black Panther, because he had committed 400 home burglaries before then and was known as the Phantom and Handy Andy. You see, he was never caught for those because he changed his MO every few weeks, and eventually he realized he needed more money, and he stole guns to then go rob post offices starting in 1971. The next year, with a few murders under his belt, that is when Donald allegedly started planning the abduction of the Whittle child. Now, he allegedly read about it in the paper that they were having these battles over the money, the two women, the mistress and the wife, and he realized, well, they probably have a lot of money that they could use as a ransom. However, he didn't care whether it was Lesley or Ronald, just a kid. However, after cutting the telephone line at the Whittle residence and going through the garage, he came in contact first with Lesley and decided to take her. Donald took her to his car, tied her up, and laid her down in the back seat before taking her to the drain shaft and putting a bag over her head. At this point, Lesley was only 2 years older than Donald's own daughter. And after Donald was convicted of this, he allegedly was found by his lawyer in the corner of his cell, rocking back and forth, feeling remorse for Lesley. In 2008, Donald was suffering from motor neuron disease, which causes weak muscles, and so he tried to appeal his sentence and get a maximum of 30 years instead. But the judge, who had given him the whole life tariff, decided to uphold that, saying, "This is a case where the gravity of the applicant's offenses justifies a whole life order. The manner in which the young girl was killed demonstrates that it too involved a substantial degree of premeditation or planning. It also involved the abduction of a young girl. The location and manner of Lesley Whittle's death indicates that she must have been subjected by the applicant to a dreadful and horrific ordeal." Then on December 17th, 2011, Donald was taken to the hospital for breathing problems and died the next day. In this case, I truly believe that the police were the problem. Everyone except Bob Booth, which they blamed. Now, Bob treated this case like it was his own daughter's case. He was truly so invested in it and was trying to come up with the best possible ideas. He was really on it from the start. I mean, he had solved every single case he had ever worked on until this case, and I think that his fellow officers let him down, and I just think that it's horrendous that in the end he was fired and blamed for it rather than them taking responsibility. I mean, the amount of guilt that Bob felt for this murder, even though it wasn't his fault, breaks my heart, and we just really need more officers like him. But do you think Lesley's death was an accident or done out of rage? I can't decide if I think that she was ever going to be kept alive. He was so money motivated this entire time. The robberies, the post offices, he wasn't just killing to kill, he was money motivated. And if that was the case, he would have known that killing Lesley would not get him the money. He needed her alive to get the ransom money, or it wasn't gonna happen. And so to kill her doesn't make any sense to me unless he was so angered in the moment that he saw the patrol car or thought he heard helicopters, which were never used in the case, by the way. That would have just been in his head. Unless he got spooked by that and decided to kill her anyway, it doesn't really make sense to me. But even if he got spooked, I mean, unless he was just really panicking, he should have thought about the money and that he can still get the money even if the police are involved. I don't know. I'd love to hear your theories on this one. It breaks my heart. And I got sucked into this case, of course, because it was called The Black Panther, and we all know that Marvel movie came out, and it's one of probably my favorite Marvel movies. But it has nothing to do with this case, really. I wonder if the ones who created The Black Panther knew about this crime, or it was just like an awful coincidence where the Black Panther is also the name of a serial killer. I don't know. Thought it was interesting though. Thought you guys might like this case. And as always, I love to share these stories of victims who had their lives taken far too soon. But don't ever forget to speak up. Your voice is powerful enough, and I love you to absolute pieces. Okay, bye.